Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 280, cover dated September 1991, and this is the finale, part 4 of the Muir Island saga, picking up and following on from X Factor number 69. So this is quite a striking cover by Jim Lee. We have Cyclops there and Professor X. He's cradling an injured Professor X in a Pieta, Michelangelo Pieta style pose. And in the background, we've got a trio of X-Men, Wolverine, Rogue, and Colossus in their old uniforms and costumes, and Jean Grey, of course, as well in her X-Factor costume. And this is the last time that we see these characters in those costumes, because next month is coming the soft reboot relaunch, where we will have the gold and blue teams into the future. And also noteworthy in that connection is the corner box here, which features what must be regarded as the last of the X-Men prior to the division of the characters into the blue and gold teams. So just as a matter of record, our final iteration of the X-Men from the Chris Claremont era include Psylocke, Wolverine, and Jubilee, as well as Gambit and Storm and Banshee there. So let's open this one up and take a look at the splash page here, kind of half splash here, with Professor X in his containment suit coming onto the destroyed Muir Island. So at the end of X Factor 69, the Shadow King possessed Legion and used Legion's pyrotic power to blast Moira MacTaggart's Mutant Research Institute on the island. So throughout this issue, we get Professor X's thoughts in these yellow captions, and of course he's surveying the destruction and wondering whether his students, X-Men and X-Factor alike might be dead from the explosion, but they're not. So here we have our double page half splash, and it's pretty dramatic here with the Legion possessed by the Shadow King, and we have the various members of X-Factor and the X-Men also captive. And the creative team here, for one step back, two steps forward, is Fabian Nicieza, writer, Andy Kubert with Stephen Butler, pencilers. So Stephen Butler finishes off the issue. He's responsible for the last 3 pages. We've got a team of inkers, Inks Are Us, and my research shows me that the inkers were Scott Williams. This is absolutely a Scott Williams inked couple of pages, as I think is the first page too. Also Joseph Rubenstein and Mike Baer are the credited inkers as part of this team. But I also discern, I think, and I'll mention it when I get to the page, Andy Kubert's father, Joe Kubert, I think he might have inked a couple of pages too. So I'll point that out when we get to them. So here we have the Shadow King helpfully recapping what has happened to date, and in particular in X Factor 69, for any readers who didn't pick up that issue. And then we have the SHIELD agent attacking Legion, and they're destroyed by Legion telekinetically deflecting their attacks. Then the scene switches to a SHIELD helicopter, aboard which are Colonel Vajan and Mystique, and we have Colonel Vajan coming to the grim conclusion that if Professor X doesn't put an end to the Shadow King's existence, that they are prepared to launch a tactical nuclear strike on the island of Muir Isle. And I wonder what the UK government would have made of that at the time. And then we switch back to Muir Isle and the battle between Professor X and his son, Legion, but possessed by the Shadow King, who's mocking the Professor here by calling him Daddy, yes? And so Legion is attacked ultimately by Storm who comes in from behind and strikes him with a lightning blast. And Legion makes his escape, and that gives the X-Men and Professor X some time to come up with a plan. So these pages here, not inked by Scott Williams. My guess is that these pages are inked by Joseph Rubinstein at this point. And here we find Legion having retreated down into a sub chamber of the Muir facility, where he has imprisoned Lorna Dane, going all the way back to Uncanny X-Men 269, and where Lorna acts as his nexus point, the point of connection for the Shadow King from the astral plane to the physical world. And the Shadow King, through Legion, decides to send the corrupt and possessed X-Men and other mutants against X-Factor and the free X-Men, including Moira MacTaggert here in her Highland chieftain's garb and costume. And what we see here is that Professor X has been injured in the battle with Legion, so he needs the protection of his students, X-Factor and the X-Men, while he prepares to go onto the astral plane in order to attack and try and defeat the Shadow King. And he's going to rely on Jean, whose telepathic powers have returned, but who is still not in full control of them. And he's relying on her to be his anchor to the physical world while he is here on the astral plane attacking the Shadow King. And he gets into the same armor that he wore back in Uncanny X-Men 117 when he previously took on the Shadow King in the astral plane. Those issues by Claremont and Byrne. And it is around this point that I have a feeling that Joe Kubert might have done some inking here. This looks comparable to Joe Kubert, his own inking style. You can see it here on the sinews of Professor X's arm, on the way that the metallic shine of the armor is rendered. It's very reminiscent of Joe Kubert. And as I said, I wouldn't be surprised. And so then basically the Shadow King, who's huge, massive here, faces off against Professor X, who's much smaller in size. And then we switch back to the physical world, where the Shadow King is, the damage he's inflicting on Xavier is having physical consequences in our world, where the bones of his legs are breaking. And so a decision is made to send the X-Men after Lorna Dane in order to disrupt the Shadow King's nexus. But of course they're met by the possessed X-Men, such as Gambit here, and we get a rematch between Gambit and Wolverine. And we also have Madrox involved, and we've got Banshee going after his daughter Teresa Cassidy Siren as well. And here's a good page of the rematch between Gambit and Wolverine. So up to this point, Claremont had been writing Wolverine as sickening and weakening, and in Uncanny X-Men 273, for example, in the Michael Golden drawn pages, Gambit got the better of Wolverine. And this time around, the outcome of the fight is reversed, and Wolverine bests Gambit. So Wolverine is healing up, and we're in the continuity that's coming. The whole storyline of Wolverine being weakened is going to be completely ignored. But this is nicely drawn by Kubert. I like this. Not sure who's inking this one. Could be Rubinstein, perhaps, now that I think about it. And then we go back to the astral plane, and the battle between the Shadow King and Professor X. This is a very classic Kubert face, downlit with the eyes, nose and mouth in shadow. We see a lot of that from him in his run on adjectiveless X-Men. And so Jean makes the decision that all the students present should go inside into the astral plane with Professor X, and she's going to facilitate that. And the hope is, as she says here, and we can only pray that the others prevent anyone from attacking our defenseless bodies, just as Legion emerges from the wreckage. So there's a threat there just as they go into the astral plane to back up the professor, who is losing to the Shadow King. And then we get this scene with Banshee taking on, going after his daughter, Siren, and he's blasted by Moira MacTaggart. But she in turn is blasted from behind by Forge, who, if you look closely, is missing his moustache there and there. So somehow or other he managed to find time, and also here for a quick shave for some reason. And of course Forge has whipped up a gizmo whereby he's able to block the Shadow King's telepathic influence on possessed people and mutants. And so Moira comes to herself, and Banshee's shocked. He says, when Forge asks him, "Are you okay?" Banshee replies, "Hardly, Forge. The woman I love tried to kill me." And we got this interesting little line from Moira where she says, like almost in a whisper, "Don't they all at one time or another?" And I wonder what Fabian Nicieza means by that. Is it a reference to that Claremont trope of you always kill the one you love? Or what is it? It's just an interesting point. But anyway, she comes to her senses and she apologizes for attacking him in the way that she's been behaving in recent months. And then we have Guido sneaking up on them, but Rogue gets the drop on him, punches him out. And just as I was rereading it, I noted that this kind of top-down view is a favorite of Jim Lee's, and I think that Kubert has studied Lee's issues and is reproducing that style of panel here on this particular page. And then we have a little scene with Wolverine and Jubilee, where Wolverine says to Jubilee to come on out, that he's not going to fight her. And so she comes out because she's ambivalent about taking on Wolverine, and then basically he slaps her with the back of his fist, and then of course she'll be brought to her senses by Forge, we assume. And then we go back to the astral plane, and we have Legion possessed by the Shadow King in the physical plane, taking possession, or not, well, telepathically or telekinetically rather, lifting Xavier's body from the ground as everyone is attacking the Shadow King on the astral plane. And the Shadow King has a grip on him in the astral plane here, we can see. And Professor X tells his students, stop him, no matter what it takes. And we get a pretty speedy denouement climax to this storyline with the Shadow King that has been building for pretty much 30 issues since Uncanny X-Men 253. And it all happens on this particular page, where in the heart of the underground complex beneath the destroyed Mutant Research Institute, Forge manages to cure Psylocke of being possessed by the Shadow King, and uses her manifested psychic knife to go through Lorna's head and in effect break the Shadow King's connection to the physical world. And so we see it here in these panels. He's defeated, as simple as that, as it turned out, as he says there, or as he shouts, "No, I was so close." And we get Professor X's internal monologue explaining what's happened. "I feel the nexus torn asunder for the Shadow King. It is the severing of his life's blood. I rejoice that my X-Men have broken the link. The energy released from the Shadow King's final dissipation is nearly overwhelming. We are caught like flotsam in the rushing tide. I guide Jean as we desperately absorb what we can of the rampant psychic energies. Together we act as a shield for the others. Naked, their minds could not cope with this onslaught. And then, in the physical world, the Shadow King's possession of Legion is broken, but Legion slumps, unconscious, dead to the ground. Professor X thinks, I feel David's mind simply wink out. I reach for my son, it's too late. I would weep for him were there time, but there was never time for David. And I must guide my students out of danger and into the light. I always found, the first time I read this, I found that a very moving line that Nicieza wrote for Professor X. David Haller is Professor X's son, and just he never spent any time with him. And in this issue, his concern is for his students, his cherished students, as the point is made when they arrive on the Astral Plane. The Shadow King actually uses that line. Let me just find it here, because it's an interesting contrast when they arrive. Let me just find it. Let's see. Yes, your most cherished students. He refers to these ones who are helping him on the Astral Plane. And here his own son, as he says, but there was never time for David. It's striking, it's moving, and a nice little character piece from Nicieza. And this definitely is an issue, unlike picking up halfway through 279 and probably hastily scripting X Factor 69. This is much more assured scripting from Nicieza in this particular issue. Then we have a 6-panel conclusion. Oh yeah, something else to note is this is when Stephen Butler takes over as penciler, so the last 3 pages of the issue. So obviously Kubert was rushed and or just didn't have the time to hit the deadline, and so they needed Butler to come in and finish off the last 3 pages of the book. So Professor X has lost the use of his legs again. The damage from the injuries inflicted on him on the astral plane have manifested on the physical plane, and he can't walk again. So he says here, sadly, my fate is a different one. My back is shattered, a parting gift from the Shadow King. It appears if I'm ever to achieve my dream, I will need all of you to walk me there. And the last caption then, the end and the beginning. So this really marks the end of, for all intents and purposes, the 1980s iteration of the X-Men. And into the future now, already X-Force #1 is out. And coming next month, we have Uncanny X-Men 281 by Portacio and scripted by John Byrne, and of course X-Men #1 by Jim Lee and scripted by Claremont, and X Factor 71 is coming soon by Peter David and Larry Stroman. So we're into a whole new era of the X-Books, and this is the end of the Claremont era, properly speaking, bringing to an end hastily his plans for the Shadow King, who's utterly defeated and apparently dies at the end of this issue. So I do hope that you enjoyed this review. If you did so, please like the video, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.